Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today's a Q&A episode, and I have three questions I want to dive into. But first, before I do that, I just want to go over a few ways you can help support the podcast. If you are looking to take your training and nutrition to the next level, or you just need a little bit more guidance, then my one-on-one online coaching program is for you. I hope you lose body fat and build muscle with my body recomp training and nutrition lifestyle methods. Coaching would also be for you if you feel like you've been working hard, not seeing the changes you want. You have the knowledge, but you can't seem to piece it all together. And lastly, you just haven't been feeling like yourself lately. Maybe you're tired, you can't stick with anything there with that. And so we look at things like your lifestyle and biofeedback to individualize your training and nutrition program to you and your specific needs. We also find that there's at least 1 to 2 bottlenecks outside of the nutrition protocol and the training protocol that we figure that are keeping you from seeing the results you want to see. And when I say nutrition protocol, I more so mean like outside your macros and calories, right? There with that. So if you are interested in this, you can find the link to my application in the show notes. You can set up a free 30-minute call where we discuss things in more detail, or you can reach out to me on Instagram and we can chat about this in more detail. If you aren't interested in full coaching, I do one-on-one consultations where we troubleshoot any issues you have or map out a game plan for the next couple months. If you want to learn more about a body recomp, what it is, how to do it, then I have my free masterclass on this topic, and you can find the link to that in the show notes as well. Next, if you don't, give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN_, and that's where I'm most active on social media. And you can reach out to me with any questions there with that. And then lastly, if you found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find this podcast. So with that out of the way, let's dive into today's top question. So first, question I have is, how big of a role do genetics play in energy expenditure? And this person asked this question because they were reading that some of the recommendations for particularly women in their 40s around the menopause period of time, like the kind of recommendations like 1200 to 1700 calories. And they're like, man, is that pretty low? That seems pretty low. And I think my thoughts were, yeah, generally that is relatively low amount of calories. However, a lot of these recommendations they make are going to be around the general kind of population. You take this kind of population, women, so women generally are smaller than men. So, that right there is going to decrease the amount of calories they need. Then you take, hey, most people are relatively sedentary. That's going to decrease the amount of calories. So you end up at this like 1200 to 1700 for a lot of people. Not a lot of people, but again, certain demographics. But I think people don't understand how big of a role things like staying active, lifting weights, and whatnot can play on energy expenditure. And so this kind of goes back to the role of genetics here in energy expenditure, and they no doubt play a large role. What I'll say on this, though, before I kind of dive into these specifically, you first need to focus on maximizing your diet habits. You need to focus on maximizing your activity, your lifestyle, before worrying about if this is the reason you might have trouble losing body fat. Because that's typically why people ask about energy expenditures. Oh, I really struggle to lose fat. And really, it comes down to a lot of the times their habits are off, and those need to be focused on first. And like I said, a lot of the time when a client comes to me, these aren't maxed out, and we have a lot of runway there with that. And it could be impacting your energy expenditure. So first, really make sure you are maximizing things. A lot of times people aren't really honest with themselves. And when they dive into it a little bit deeper, it's okay, that does play a role. And we'll talk about some things that can impact your energy expenditure overall, but also just understanding that genetics do play a role in this process for sure. But again, the big thing is that before worrying about this, like you have to make sure your habits are in place. A lot of times it's usually the methods that people take that are causing them to maybe feel like they need to eat less calories than they would think there with that. And then it ends up leading to people being like, it's my genetics, and that's a problem. And again, there is some truth to that. Genetics certainly play a role. So let's talk about this. So what does impact energy expenditure? So this is how many calories you burn in a day. A lot of times people just think it is just how much you expend from activity. Or again, if somebody tracks their workouts, it's like, okay, that's the only calories that I burn throughout the day, which that's not the case, right? You burn calories in multiple different ways. So we have our basal metabolic rate, right? So that's BMR. That's the amount of calories your body burns, just basic bodily functions and what you need to survive. Okay. And that makes up a big chunk. So that's going to be a big chunk of how many calories somebody burns throughout the day. Next would be your thermic effective food. Again, this is TEF, and this is how many calories you burn via absorption and digestion of food. So again, it does take energy to eat food, so that's and to digest it and absorb it. So that's going to cause you to burn some calories throughout the day. Then we have NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and this is unconscious or subconscious kind of movement, day-to-day movement without you really thinking about it. So me blinking, me fidgeting, me talking, that's considered NEAT. Even just like movement you do from day to day, walking from in the grocery store, walking from to your car, things like that. And lastly, we have exercise activity, and this is the calories you burn from exercise. And obviously, the NEAT and the exercise activity. Those are going to be two things that are very variable from person to person there with that. So that's the energy that you expend throughout the day there with that. So let's talk about things that can impact how many calories you burn throughout the day. So first, it is going to be genetics. Genetics are going to play a big role. So we talked about basal metabolic rate being a big kind of aspect of the energy expenditure. And for some people, they do just naturally burn a little less calories. And so there was this paper from Poncer et al. In 2021, and they kind of looked at, okay, how many total daily energy expenditure. They kind of looked at how many calories people will burn on average. And there's this little plot, this little graph here, and they plot it where everyone falls. And just for example, there was an 80 kilogram female, right? So 80 kilograms, that's going to be, let me do my quick math here. Sorry for all my people that outside of the States. That's about 176 pounds. And one person, her total daily energy expenditure was right around 1,200. And then you look at somebody at the same body weight, and this person is a male, and they're burning almost 6,000 calories per day. And then again, like on this plot, you can just see that there's this cluster around 1,200 to 3,200, right? That's where most people are going to be. But you will see these outliers that fall outside of that cluster and then way up, right? And then there's everyone in between that fall at the bottom of the cluster, at the top, in the middle. So really what this means is that genetics are going to play a big role, right? And how many calories you burn in a day is partly based on genetics. Now, some of these people, again, this is going to count for everything that we talked about. Part of this could be that this person that's expending 6,000 calories per day, and part of it could be genetics, but it could also be that they just have a really high energy expenditure from exercise activity and NEAT. So again, there is going to be a genetic component to this. And this is why when I do set calories for clients, there is a little bit of a trial and error period with it, because we have to see if they may fall on the high end of this, they may fall on the low end, or they may fall where most people do there with that. Genetics are going to play a big role in your total daily energy expenditure. Next is going to be muscle mass and body size. So the amount of muscle you have, it's not that building muscle itself, like muscle is going to necessarily be much more, every pound of muscle that you have, it's not like you're going to see this like 500 calorie increase of burning calories, right? It's just that muscle mass is going to allow you to be at a heavier body weight and be leaner, right? Obviously dependent on your body fat levels, but it is going to keep your body size from falling too low, right? And this is a big mistake I see people make when they're trying to maybe just focus on weight loss. Is they're losing weight, and again, maybe they're not overly focused on what that weight is made up of, and they're just trying to get to a low body weight. They just think that's where they want to be, and they end up being a smaller body, and a smaller body is going to burn less calories overall. And the fact that they do just have less muscle, because again, muscle is going to be energy costly to build and maintain. And with this, the less muscle you have, the smaller your body weight is overall, the lower amount of calories you're going to burn. You go back to this example I gave of those recommendations of 1,200 to 1,700. A lot of people in that menopausal period of time are trying to be their lowest body weight and just lose weight, and they don't have a lot of muscle because they're just focused on trying to lose weight, right? So they just walk around they're not expending as much energy. Now, this doesn't mean that you want to be as big as possible, because obviously there is a point where, the larger you are, that's probably not great either from an overall health standpoint. And again, just because you burn a lot of calories doesn't necessarily mean that's a great thing for your overall health long term. There's that Goldilocks zone. There's a pretty wide range, and most people don't need to worry about building too much muscle. Your main takeaway from this is don't worry about building too much muscle, but you should worry about just trying to drop weight. I've made some content pieces in the past on why I think it's not great to always just focus on strictly just weight loss. And one of my main reasons was the fact that your energy expenditure can go down. In today's world too, we want to try to maintain our metabolic rate as much as possible. We want to try to put everything in our favor, just because it's easy to be sedentary. And on top of it, a lot of the foods that we consume and that are out there that we have access to, and again, they're tasty, are usually fairly calorie dense. And so we do want to try to expend as much energy as possible if we want to maintain our weight and maintain a healthy body composition. Next is going to be your hormonal status, right? So hormones certainly play a role in your energy expenditure. However, I think this is more of a lifestyle thing versus the hormones itself, right? I think a lot of times the reason people's maybe hormonal profile isn't optimal from a body composition standpoint is their methods and the way they go about things, right? So maybe you're somebody who is slightly overweight or has higher body fat levels. That's probably not going to be great from an overall hormonal status. Maybe your sleep is off, right? Maybe your stress is super high. Maybe you're somebody who's really tries to expend a lot of energy and you go, but then you don't ever fuel yourself for that. And then on top of it, you have poor sleep. So It's not necessarily the hormones that are the issue. It's what you're doing to get them there. But then that is going to cause a potential decrease in your energy expenditure. We want to try to optimize your lifestyle and your nutrition methods and your training methods to make sure that we do put you in that optimal kind of state there. And this is why I track clients' biofeedback, right? We're going to make sure they're not super hungry. We want to make sure they're feeling good. We want to make sure they're not super low energy. And if they are, we're going to look into this and see where we can focus on those areas, right? And make sure they're in a good spot there. You could get your blood work, but again, I think your biofeedback is going to be a big thing here. And again, if you are finding that you're somebody who if you feel like you need to go really low calorie, this may be something that you want to look into. Okay, what are my lifestyle methods? What are my training methods? What are my nutrition methods? So, for example, a common client avatar that we'll get is somebody who maybe is weight loss resistant. And then you look and they're like, they've been trying to diet for 3 years straight. They're super restrictive. And then they yo-yo, right? And then their sleep is off. Again, the issue isn't necessarily their hormones per se, like they are the issue, but the issue is that the things that they're doing that got them to that point, right? Because the body's adaptive, so it will adapt, and it is focused on survival. So it's going to do things that, its main focal point is on that. So again, hormonal status can be an issue. Next would be things like your overall movement. So we talked about energy expenditure, NEAT, exercise activity. Being sedentary is probably not great for overall health. There is some appetite dysregulation as well, where you end up feeling more hungry and you don't really eat in line with your energy expenditure, right? Whether that be from just because you're bored, but either way, low levels of activity are associated with appetite dysregulation and usually leading to lower energy expenditure, but also higher energy intake as well too. So movement can be great. That's going to be an easy way to increase your energy expenditure throughout the day. Now, this again doesn't mean that you need to be eating or moving 20,000 steps or more every single day. There is a point of diminishing returns, especially as you get into an energy deficit there with that. So I think the big takeaway is try to aim for a minimum of 6,000 to 7,000. And I find that sweet spot is about 8,000 to 10,000 per day there with that. So again, we want to make sure we are staying moving and staying active, and that can be helpful to increase your energy expenditure. The energy balance that you're in is going to play a big role, right? When you're at maintenance or surplus, that's your body's going to be in an optimal kind of state there. Right now, surplus, things will start slow down over time. However, if you're for a short period of time giving your body enough energy, and a small calorie surplus can be helpful from this standpoint, right? It can speed up your metabolism in a way. Here again, there's diminishing returns after a certain point. The higher the surplus is, the longer you do it, the more body fat you gain. There's going to be a point of diminishing returns here. But if you're somebody who's always really been in an energy deficit, you've always tried to restrict your calorie intake, getting you to maintenance or a calorie surplus can be helpful for your energy expenditure. And usually the people that feel like they have a slow metabolism are people that really try to spend a lot of time restricting calories. But also when you are in an energy deficit, for some people, your energy expenditure can come down slightly, right? And it's just a adaptation that happens to make sure you don't lose a ton of weight and to make sure that your body doesn't get rid of all its extra energy reserves like your body fat. Because again, thousands of years ago, having extra body fat was, let me rephrase this. Thousands of years ago, we didn't know when we were going to get our next food, when we were going to eat next. And so the body's really good at adapting to weight loss. It will slow down your energy expenditure. So, the energy balance you're in will impact your energy expenditure. And that's where people get a little confused with the calories in, calories out there. So again, making sure you spend enough time at maintenance, maybe even a small calorie surplus for some people. And that can help you obviously build muscle. And then in turn, it can help your body be in that optimal state from an energy expenditure standpoint. Medications, right? There's certain medications that can slow down your energy expenditure as well too, right? Think things like potentially any SSRIs, things like that can slow down your energy expenditure slightly. So again, something to monitor there with that. Your methods, again, that kind of goes back to energy balance. If you're restricting your energy for long periods of time, you're really trying to expend as much as possible, and then you're also not getting good sleep, your stress management's terrible, that's going to slow down your energy expenditure there with that. And then lastly, I think this is more indirect, but stress management and sleep can also impact your energy expenditure, right? So these are all things there. To sum this up, one, there is no set amount of calories that's going to be helpful for you. There is going to be some trial and error. Genetics do play a role in your energy expenditure, but your methods are the big thing here that you can manage and get dialed in. So a lot of times what we try to do initially with new clients is we try to get this all set up in an optimal spot so they can be expending as much energy as possible, which in turn is going to help them maintain their weight, drop weight, whatever it is for them, right? Too many people just focus on, oh, I just need to restrict calories and move more, and then boom, I'm good to go. But that's missing all these things. One other thing that I didn't mention that I do want to add in as I'm thinking about this would be your overall diet quality. If you're lacking a lot of essential vitamins and minerals, that can have downstream effects and that can impact your energy expenditure, right? So making sure that you do have a good diet quality overall and you have a good base of whole foods and a variety of foods can be helpful there with that to also make sure that energy expenditure doesn't drop. So that's my energy expenditure 101. Hopefully this was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions on this topic. So my next question is, when dieting, when would we make adjustments to protein and fats? And I said you could potentially, really depends on where you are heading into the fat loss diet. If protein is on the lower end, then you likely wouldn't make an adjustment to protein, right? If it's on the higher end, then maybe you could decrease protein slightly. And then same with fats. Again, if it's on the higher end, if it's on the lower end of what we would want, we probably wouldn't decrease fats, right? We would probably decrease carbs. But if it was on the higher end, we would be more likely to decrease that. And then if someone has a high amount of training volume, it may make sense to decrease somewhat via fats and or protein to keep carbs from getting too low, right? So we have protein, carbs, fats, and we need to make sure that then we have our calories. Those macros make up your calories. And so when we drop our calories, something has to give. So the first thing we'll typically drop is carbohydrates. But again, that's not always the case, right? It could be protein, it could be fats. It just depends on where they're at. We don't want carbs to get so low that then you might not have the energy for training. But unfortunately, that's usually the one that has to take the biggest hit during fat loss because of the fact that, again, we want to hit a minimum of around 20 to 30% of our body weight in fats. So what that means is if you're 170 pounds, that's going to be about 34 to 51 grams of fats per day. And again, you just want to make sure you hit enough essential fatty acids, and we want to make sure fats don't get too low because that can start to mess with your hormones. And then protein, again, we don't want to be too low because then that could potentially, that's probably not going to be great from a lean body mass maintenance and building. And then also protein is very satiating to eat. So we don't want that to fall too low. However, if you go super high with protein, and again, after about 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight, anything more than that, it's not going to be any better from a muscle building standpoint. So you've largely maxed out the lean body mass aspect of things there. If you like to eat higher protein, it's satiating for you, then you can go a little bit higher. But the big thing there is we just don't want to take away from carbs and fats, right? So you wouldn't want protein to be so high that now you have to eat low carb, and then that's going to impact your training. There is a cost analysis that we have to do on this and figure out. Again, if the only time you would adjust fats and protein would be if either one's either super low or super high, and or it's like impacting training and how you feel from day to day. But typically carbs are usually the biggest thing that we decrease during a fat loss phase from, say, maintenance. And again, that's just simply because there really is no minimum amount that you need, whereas like protein and fats, there is a minimum you need to hit. And so you have to take away from carbs to get into the calorie deficit that you need to. But in saying that, it's not a black or white answer of this is when. Those would be things I would look at. So other things I would look at in terms of potentially making adjustments to protein would be, again, one, on the way up, if you're on the higher end, like if you're trying to decrease protein, again, if it's taking away from fats and or carbohydrates, again, like your training's really suffering, you just feel like super flat, maybe digestion's off a little bit, that would be where I would potentially decrease protein. If I would increase protein, again, that would be if you're like not very satiated, you're under that like 0.7, 0.8 grams per pound of body weight there with that. Like those would be things where I'd be like, okay, now we need to increase protein there with that. But again, I think the big thing with protein is it's important, but I also feel like maybe now the pendulum's swung to where it's, oh, you just need to get protein as high as possible. And that's not really the case. There's that point of diminishing returns with protein. And again, it's around that 0.7, 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight. Again, anything more, you just want to make sure that you're not taking away from carbs. And you also need to make sure that you enjoy eating that amount of protein as well too. So hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully that gives you some idea about when you need to adjust protein and fats while dieting. Last question of the day, when in fat loss, does counting veggies affect the macros? Should I log them as well? Thanks. So 100%, veggies are food, they have energy, so they are going to have macros associated with them. So they would affect your macros, right? Your body's going to hopefully, if you're in good gut health, your body is going to absorb and digest the nutrients from it. And, your body is going to use that for energy, right? So they would count. It's not like they're like, oh, your body just doesn't recognize those as energy. It does. So it is going to impact your energy expenditure, or sorry, your energy intake. It's going to impact your macros. However, do you have to track them? And I don't have clients track them in all cases. Okay. So now this goes to the point of, do I have to track or do they count? So yes, they do count because again, anything you eat, you consume, your body's going to use that for energy, right? So whether you track it or not, it's going to count. Do you have to track? Now that's a separate question. And no, you don't have to track them. Since vegetables are typically low in calories and macros for the amount of food, it's hard to underestimate if your servings are off. So what I mean is if you're off by a serving size of broccoli, it's okay, you're adding like maybe 10 to 20 calories, right? But if you're off on a serving size of say like peanut butter, it's okay, now you're adding 180 calories. So you could see where it's like you don't need to be overly worried about your veggies. Understand that they do count as calories. Now, things that you do need to be worried about tracking and going over on serving sizes would be things that are more calorie dense in nature. And so really, I think what this ends up coming down to is if you're finding that you aren't seeing the results you want and aren't tracking vegetables, you may want to think about including them. However, it's not like they're going to make this massive difference, but they do count. If you're eating a ton of veggies, that's where you might want to start to pay attention to that a little bit more. So let's say you're eating a ton of veggies and on top of it, you're not seeing the results you want to see. You might want to start to get a little bit more nitty gritty with what you're tracking. However, I would say the bigger issue is going to be things outside of that, your more calorie dense foods. Also, if how you cook your veggies is important too. If you use olive oil or you use some sort of additive like oil, butter, stuff like that, again, it's going to be a little bit more important to track them. So how you cook your veggies and what you put on them is going to be super important too, right? Now you took something that wasn't very calorie dense and now you're adding oil and butter. And now if you're off on serving sizes, that can start to add up. So goes into a bigger kind of thought around tracking. As I have a client who she likes to make things like casseroles, stuff like that. Things that are a little bit tougher to track. And for her, I've told her, she asked, do I need to be worried about this? And she's seeing results that she wants to see. So it's like, no, your method of tracking works. Because again, at the end of the day, it's not that there's any magic to tracking. It's just that it brings awareness, gives us an idea of what you're doing. But really at the end of the day, what you're actually doing, what you're eating, that's the most important. So if you have some form of tracking that's helping you get the results you want to see, you're good to go. You don't have to necessarily get nitty gritty with every last thing. However, if you want, you could potentially be speeding up the process if you get a little bit more nitty gritty with it. That's the first thing. But two, you stop seeing results, then that's where we would dive into it and see, okay, hey, here's your approach. How can we improve this approach that you're having there with that? So that's how I go about tracking. And then lastly, I think too, a lot of times, sometimes people may see clients' calories and be like, oh, that's way too low. But tracking is very inaccurate. I guess when I say that, it's accurate, but it's also inaccurate at the same time. And so this is why I pair, hey, let's track your calories. Here's where you're at. Here's where your weight's going. And then also tracking their biofeedback. Because if a client, say it's a male who's 150 pounds, for them, you would think, okay, you probably don't need to go too low under 2000 calories to drop weight. But for some people, we track and they're at 1700 and maybe that's their deficit. But that's relative to them. We're also looking at their biofeedback to where it's like, okay, are they actually eating 1700 calories? Maybe not. But if they're feeling good, they're dropping weight, everything else that we look is trending in the direction we want. That's their baseline, right? Whether they're actually eating that amount or not. Because again, I'm not necessarily worried about the calories. It's just, hey, what are your results? How are you feeling in this process? Now, if I have somebody eating 1700 calories and they're super hungry, they feel like crap, they're losing weight, but it's not necessarily coming from their midsection, then that's a sign, okay, this calorie amount is too low. And we probably do need to work on that. So again, we do have to pair it up with their biofeedback. There's that. That kind of dove into a little bit more around tracking there with that. So hopefully that's helpful. Again, veggies do count towards your macros, but whether you track them or not is ultimately up to you and your results and how you're feeling. And that's, again, a conversation I have with clients in terms of how in depth do we want to get with this. So hopefully that was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions and I will chat with you guys next time.